Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. How's everyone doing tonight? Alhamdulillah. Keeping warm? Inshallah ta'ala. Good. Trying to at least. Alhamdulillah. Alright, so let's get started. Bismillah. Alhamdulillah. Wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ba'd. So today is an open question and answer session. Last time we had this about a month ago. Been about a month now, right? About a month. Alhamdulillah, we had a lot of questions. The questions just continued, and even after the program was done, the questions continued. So it means that generally, there's a presumption that there's a lot of people who have questions out there, and it's very important to ask questions. We should not shy away, and we should really take this opportunity. I'll tell you that I used to have a lot of questions about Islam when I was growing up, but there was not that many avenues to get the questions asked, because either I didn't know where to ask them, or the people we tried to ask, they're very busy, it's hard to reach them or something. So it's good to take advantage of this opportunity. And remember that the Prophet ﷺ, he said, إِنَّمَا شِفَاءُ الْعِي السُّؤَالِ. He said that the cure for ignorance is the question, is the su'al. It's asking somebody who may know the answer. So inshallah ta'ala, I'm going to start by opening up the floor. If anybody has questions, you can start. And if not, then we have some written questions here to help get you warmed up, inshallah. So who would like to start the question session? Bismillah. Yeah. Good question. How do we increase our Iman? Or how do we maintain our Iman, our faith, our dedication to Islam? So this is a very good question, and it's a very important question, and it's not a clear-cut answer because everyone has things which they're struggling with, and everyone has different challenges. So we actually usually have to look at the state of a person individually to figure out what is causing this person's Iman to go down. But I'll give a general answer, right? So the general answer is we need to make sure that we're doing everything we need to be doing on a daily basis. So the first thing is we should be fulfilling the fara'id at minimum. The thing is, if you're not fulfilling the main obligations of Islam, like prayer, if you're not fulfilling the main obligations like paying your zakah and all of that, there's no way to really have a strong Iman if you're missing in these things, right? Unless Iman is the problem of these things as well. So another thing we can do, one of the things that the righteous scholars used to do is they say that when you read about righteous people, it increases your Iman and it boosts your confidence. And spending time with righteous people is the number one and best way to do that. So this is really my simple solution would be, try and spend time with people who are righteous, who remind you of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you cannot find them for some reason, then read about them. Reading about them goes a long way. Sheikh Ibn Taymiyyah was one of the great scholars. He used to say that when he got tired of reading all these other books, very technical books and fiqh and Islamic law and all of that, he would start reading about the righteous people. He would read about the prophets, he would read about the Sahaba, and then he would read about the righteous people that lived in every single generation. And when you read their stories, you start looking and saying, man, now I have some model to emulate. I have someone to look up to. One of the biggest problems, I think, why our Iman is so down is that the people around us don't have very strong Iman either. And we live in a non-Muslim society. Many people have absolutely no Iman. They don't even have belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Or no real belief. So that's naturally going to affect us. When we're around people who remind you of Allah and remind you about why we're Muslim, who remind you about the beauty of Islam, it just continues to increase your Iman. And if you have a friend like that or a few friends like that, try and spend as much time as you can with them, because they're going to be the absolute best thing you can do. So that's one of the best ways to kind of maintain that minimum level and kind of bring it back. And then after that, it's different for every single person. Some people need to go and start praying Qiyamul Layl. They need to wake up at night and they need to start praying. Some people need to start fasting extra. Some people need to, understand, get more khushu' in their prayer. They need to understand what they're saying in their prayer. Many people pray and they have no idea what they're saying. So your Iman is going to go down if you keep praying and you don't improve your prayer at all. If it just remains at the bare minimum level, that's going to be a problem, right? Understanding why we fast, these type of things, inshallah ta'ala. So these are all things that we need to help improve, inshallah. Right? Any other questions on the floor? Yes. Yes. Good question. Okay, so I mentioned in my khutbah today, we should prepare for the worst and hope for the best. So how do we prepare for the worst is your question. So given the current circumstances, there's a lot of things we can do to prepare. The first thing we can do, and what we're talking about here is in terms of Muslims and potential persecution that we may be facing, that's on the rise and increase. Right? So hope for the best. We always, we shouldn't panic. We shouldn't go into panic mode and start freaking out or something like that. We should behave as dignified Muslims, have strong Iman in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But at the same time, preparing for the worst would basically mean a few things. Number one, we should be teaming up with different organizations or different communities that are also going to be persecuted, and who we can find strength with and find alliances with them. This is something that's very, very important. So that's one way of preparing for the worst. Second way of preparing for the worst is that on an individual level, on a family level, every Muslim should keep an emergency pack with them. In case some emergency happens, they need to leave the house quickly. Every Muslim should try to learn some type of martial arts or something to be able to potentially defend themselves. Every Muslim should have some kind of contact list and have emergency preparedness ready and prepared and ready to go. We should make sure that we have some money stored away and some potential, in case we don't have access to money or something like that. We should make sure that we have certain allies that we can call upon in a sense of emergency who will be there for us, right? These are some ways to prepare for the worst case scenario. Things that we may be anticipating that the worst thing could happen, this type of thing could potentially happen to us. We should be ready for it and prepared for it in these ways. So it just depends. Every situation is different. Some people are saying there could be some type of internment or something like that. Some people are saying there could be certain mass deportations or something like that. So we should prepare for each of these potential scenarios with the way that is conducive to that scenario itself, right? So you take one scenario and you say, if this were to happen, what would I actually do? What could I do to prepare myself for this right now, right? That's what you should look at every potential scenario. So the scenario could be that Muslims will have to register their names, for example, right? Like this ID card thing that they've been talking about. That's a big problem, right? Registering yourself. So how can we prepare for something like that? Well, the first thing is we can make sure that we're ready to reach out to people and say, hey, do you agree that this is unacceptable in America? Do you agree that this is unacceptable, are you going to help combat it? Are you going to make sure that you don't enforce it? LAPD just recently came out and they said if they start mass deportation of Muslims, we're not going to support this. We're not going to enforce it. So you reach out to people who would have to enforce it, for example, and you go to certain businesses or whoever's going to be checking your ID and say, you should boycott this. That's one way of preparing for it, right? So every single scenario we think of, we should prepare for that in the worst case scenario. So we got a lot of work to do in the next 2 months, actually. So hopefully this answers the question a little bit, inshallah. Yes. Okay, good question. So is there a specific reason why the Quran is in the order that it is in today rather than the order in which it was revealed? Yes, there's definitely a specific reason, because this is from Allah and there's no dispute about which surah is placed where. So this is directly from the Prophet, peace be upon him. So the reason is, there's many wisdoms behind it, right? First of all, we know that there's a wisdom whatever Allah does. So the reason is that when you read the Quran in terms of the way it was revealed over a period of 23 years because of the circumstances of that time, and they needed those verses at that specific time. But now when we read the Quran, it has a certain flow to it. So the thing is, the way in which it was revealed due to circumstances that were taking place does not fit in with the same type of flow in the order that it is in right now. So that's the reason why. Because otherwise, you want to make sure that the arrangement of any text, any book, any poetry, whatever it is, right, is going to be in the maximum optimal flow when you're actually reading from start to finish. So the flow of the order of revelation had to do with what incidents happened to happen at that time, which doesn't necessarily mean it's the best order for the stylistic way of having the most eloquence in the Quran. So what we have right now is the best order because of the style and the eloquence and what needs to come first and what needs to come later on. So that's the reason behind it. In fact, even the revelations came, even the surahs themselves, surahs were not all revealed in one shot. Like Surah Al-Baqarah, for example, it came in pieces, verse by verse, and all the verses were not revealed in order even in that surah. So that even the surah was rearranged in its certain order. If it wasn't rearranged, and we look at the order that we have now, it would seem like out of place, right? So that's exactly why, because it has a certain coherence when you read it across the board. That's why it was rearranged, inshallah ta'ala. Any other questions? Yes. When you're reading the translation? Okay. So the question is, when you're reading the translation of the Quran, how do you focus and how do you make sure you feel that it applies to you? Right? So that's one of the things we should do, is when we read the Quran, we should see how this is directly relevant to us and what lessons we're supposed to learn from it. So for example, look, there's two ways to read the Quran. Let's take a verse of the Quran in the beginning. In Surah Al-Baqarah, it talks about Bani Israel. Bani Israel are the children of Israel, and they're the Jews at that time. So it says, for example, Ya Bani Israel adhkuru ni'mati allati an'amtu alaykum. So it says, O children of Israel, remember the favor with which I favored you, and I chose you above, people. And then it tells us a story. And then the Bani Israel did this. The Bani Israel did that. Let's take Surah Al-Baqarah is named after the cow in the story. What happens is there's an incident about the Bani Israel being asked to slaughter a cow and them refusing to do it. Now there's two ways to look at the story. The first way you read the story is they are not listening to their prophet Musa. So you sit there and you read this and you go, you know what? Man, these people are horrible. What a horrible people, these Bani Israel people, they're terrible and they're not listening to their prophet, and look how much harm they gave. And then you can start maybe looking around and say, I know some people like that. See, that's one way to read the Quran. That's not the best way. Best way to read the Quran is, okay, I'm reading this about Bani Israel. Ask, why is Allah telling me this story? He's not telling me this story just for historical reasons. He's telling me this story because their characteristic of not listening to their prophet, their behavior of not listening to their prophet is a problem. It's very problematic, and it's showing what happened. So the lesson that we should learn when we read the story is not just that Bani Israel are bad people, but anyone who doesn't listen to their prophet and asks a lot of questions, trying to get out of the orders that Allah is giving them, that is a wrong behavior. And then we should ask ourselves, are we doing any behavior that is somewhat resembling that? Has our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, told us to do something, and we're disputing what he has told us to do in the hadith that we have or in the Quran that we have, and we don't feel like doing it? Are we somewhat like these people in this story? So it should make us change our behavior, right? So when we read the Quran that way, and we say every single story applies to us. You're reading the story of Surah Yusuf. And in the story of Surah Yusuf, Yusuf is going through difficulties, and he's thrown into a well. How many of you have been thrown into a well by your brothers before? Nobody, right? So you may think, oh, well, that's a nice story about Yusuf. Yusuf was a great prophet. Okay, but what's the moral behind that story? What lesson do we learn about patience? Have I been in a circumstance that's easier than the circumstance that he was in, but I didn't have patience? So now I learn a lesson from that, right? So that's what we need to do, is when we're reading the Quran, one of the things we can do is try to figure out what lesson is Allah trying to teach me from this verse. or from this story, and how does it apply in my specific life? It's one of the best ways we can make sure the Quran relates to us, and we can focus that way, inshallah ta'ala. Inshallah. Yes. Okay, so the question is, when we're reading certain things in the Quran and they seem to be out of place with the general message of Islam, like about peace, and there are certain verses that are, what do you say, offensive or something like that? You said aggressive, aggressive or something along those lines. How do we understand these verses? Do we understand them that it was for a specific time or for a specific people, and it doesn't apply to other people? That's not the best way of looking at it. The best way of looking at it is it was for a specific context. And when we understand the context, it's justified and understood and actually wise in that context. So when that context reappears, the verses are still relevant. See, the problem with saying it's only for that people means that if the same circumstances arise, it's not for this people, it's only for that people. But if you say the context has to arise and we're not in that specific context, then it makes sense, right? So the thing is, if you're in the middle of a war, right, and people are persecuting you, and the Quran says that you can fight these people back, and the context is they were persecuting you, right? Now the context to fight is very clear. If you remove the context and you read the verse with no context at all, and it says fight these people, but you forget the fact that these people were fighting you, and you forget the other verses that say, and if they incline towards peace, then incline towards peace, you're not going to be able to contextualize the things. So the best way to read the Quran, especially on verses like this, is in a thematic fashion. So what thematic fashion means, this is called in Arabic tafsir mawdu'i. What basically it means is, let's say I'm not understanding the story of Prophet Adam in this surah of the Quran, and something is not being clear for me. Now the story of Adam is not only in one place in the Quran. It's in Surah Al-Baqarah, and then it's again in Surah Al-A'raf with different sections, different pieces. Then it's again in another Surah Al-Kahf. Then it's in another surah of the Quran. So what I can do is, I want to understand the whole story and contextualize it very, very well. I'm going to look at every single place where Prophet Adam is mentioned in the Quran, look at all the verses that talk about it, and then put together a picture of what the Quran is trying to tell me about this. The same thing when it comes to aggressive verses or verses about fighting or something. I want to look at every single verse in the Quran that talks about fighting and put them together in a context and say, okay, now what is it trying to tell me as a whole, holistically, right? That's the best way to look at the Quran and reconcile these things. And that's why, all the scholars, whenever they analyze any issue, whether it be performing wudu or prayer or prophets or jihad or whatever concept it is, they would not just look at one part of the Quran. They would look at what the whole Quran says about this topic. They would not look at only one hadith. They would look at what all the hadiths say about this topic, and then kind of see all these pieces and put them together and say, how do they fit together? And that's why they wrote other books about Islam. Otherwise, there's no need to write other books about Islam. We have the Quran, you have the hadith, why do you need other books? You need other books because not everyone can go and take all these pieces and put them together. That's why we need other books about Islam, to help us contextualize what the Quran and what the Sunnah is actually trying to say. So that's the best way to do it, inshallah ta'ala. It's a good question. Any other question? I put one brother to sleep already. So. Yes. Inshallah. I'm going to ask for translation if you go fast though. So. The Iman. Yeah. Okay. So someone has been Muslim for 2 years now, and they feel like their Iman is going down and down. So what should they do, basically? Okay. So when it comes to that, it really kind of depends on the context of the person and why their Iman is going down. Right? It's very important. So people's Iman goes down usually for one of two reasons. Either they have a lot of bad influences around them and they're always being attacked by somebody, right? A lot of emotional stress, emotional pressure, people talking bad about Islam or something, that's going to eventually get to them. And if they're not defending themselves against this and being in really strong company, it's going to keep on bothering them. So they need to get out of the company and stay away from negative influences. That's one example. The second reason is if they don't have negative influences around them, a lot of people, they stagnate. Stagnate meaning that they don't move forward, right? So when they accept Islam, they believe in it, they believe it's the truth, but they don't move forward. So they say, Ihdina as-siratal mustaqim, guide us to the straight path. So they get on the straight path, but then they stop, and they're not going anywhere. It's like getting on the freeway, and then the car breaks down, and they're not moving anywhere. So the thing is, when people don't move, when they've been there for, let's say, 2 years, they're not reading Quran, they're not learning more about Islam, they're not trying to find better group of friends to keep them company, they're not improving themselves on a daily basis, then it's always going to regress. See, the thing is, this is the way Iman works, is that it needs constant renewal. It needs constant renewal. If you don't renew it and you say, well, you know what, I'm just going to leave it exactly where it is and it's going to stay stable, it never stays stable. It's either going to move forward or it's going to move backwards. Because always there's forces working on people's Iman, working on their emotions and their intelligence and everything, that's going to either push them back or they're going to push forward and get themselves stronger and closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what I would recommend is, first of all, strong group of friends. Good friends, number one. Number two, keep on increasing in knowledge is very important. The more you read, the more you get reminders. It's not only learning new things, it's about reminders. Sometimes you'll read a book, you read this book last year already, and it motivated you. But the motivation goes down after a while. All the influences around you, it goes down. Now you go back and you read that same book again, and now you read it with a different light, and it boosts you back up. So that's very, very important. We all need a reminder. So having these reminders are very, very important. So these are two things I would recommend. Good company and getting reminders and increasing in knowledge. It's the best way to bring the Iman back up. Inshallah ta'ala. Welcome. Yeah. All right, we can go to the online questions then. All right, question is, since pigs are regarded as filthy animals, should we allow our children to see pigs at zoos and farms where they might become very familiar with these animals? Is it all right to allow children to watch nature programs featuring pigs or cartoons which have pigs in them? Is it allowed for them to have little stuffed animals that are in the shape of a pig or something like that? Should we try to avoid these things, or are they also fine? So the thing is, we know clearly that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prohibited us from eating pork and from eating anything that actually comes from a pig. And we know that one of the wisdoms behind it is that the pig is considered to be a filthy animal. It eats its own feces, it eats the feces of other things. There's a lot of diseases affiliated with it. Its general behavior is not a very clean behavior. So that's probably one of the wisdoms why Allah prohibited it for us. But there's nothing specifically in Islam, in the Quran or in the Sunnah, that tells us that we have to avoid pigs in any way, shape or form. So for example, during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, obviously there were pigs around somewhere. Right? Otherwise pork would not have existed. Then there would be no temptation to even do anything haram at all. You don't even need to say pork is haram if there's no pigs around. Obviously there were pigs around somewhere. The Prophet ﷺ did not order the Muslims to go and wipe out the pigs. Ever. He could have done that. If he didn't want them to exist, he didn't want them to be anywhere, he could have asked them, He could have ordered that they all be removed completely, and that no Muslim or no one should ever come in contact with a pig in any way, shape, or form. But that didn't happen, right? So there's a thing about touching the pig and the saliva and all of that. We should avoid that. We should not eat pig meat. But in terms of the animal itself, it's not considered to be an abominable creature in the sense that it shouldn't exist on earth. It's a creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like the creation of all other animals. There are other animals which Allah has created and we're not allowed to eat them. But it doesn't mean that there's no beauty in them or they don't have a right to exist. Like lions and tigers and these hunters, we're not allowed to eat these animals either. But it doesn't mean that they're still creations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when it comes to having like a picture or a sticker of a pig or a doll or something along those lines, as long as the filthy aspects of the animal are not becoming totally normalized in that it's going to tempt us to start eating the pig or something like that, then generally they're okay, they're permissible. But if the behaviors or the characteristic of the pig is somehow having an influence on people to have some kind of bad behavior, then it's something that should be avoided. But in terms of just, studying a pig for scientific reasons or seeing them in a zoo or something like that, this is not prohibited, and we don't need to stop our children from, we don't need to go and say, here's the monkey, and then we go by the pig and we walk by and we say, well, we shouldn't do that, it's because it's haram. It's not the case, because we've not been forbidden from looking at them or going anywhere close to them or whatever other reason. So the prohibition was strictly on the food itself and the impurity of touching them and all of that, right? Their saliva and everything, inshallah. So hopefully that is clear. Any questions on that specifically? That's another question. So you can ask that again later. But let's focus on the pig for now. The dog issue is a pretty well-known issue. You really want me to address it, or we're just kind of throwing it in there? Yeah. If anyone else has the question, that's fine. You already have your answer, though, right? Are you still looking into it? Okay. I'll take it next then. Any questions on this one? Yes. Okay, with the pig, huh? So if or dog, or the court. Okay, yeah, about the shortness of the pants. So this is something that's first of all for men. It's primarily for men, right? It's talking about the length of the pants, right? So there is a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ which says that any part of the pant, the garment, which is below the ankles is in the fire. Okay, this is a hadith. Now, the thing is, how do we understand this hadith? What does the hadith actually mean? So scholars have looked at this from a different perspective. In Arabian society, there used to be a culture, and the culture was that rich people who were very wealthy, they used to wear long garments and they would drag their garments on the floor out of pride and out of respect. Not out of respect, out of pride and arrogance, basically. So what used to happen is that this is a sign of extravagance, that I can afford extra material, whereas most people cannot afford all this extra material. And they would drag it along, and this would be a style, but also a very arrogant style of, kind of showing off, right? So this is one of the reasons why the Prophet, peace be upon him, he prohibited. Having the pants dragging is 100% clearly should not be done at all. So then he mentioned another characteristic, and that is keeping it higher. So the Prophet, peace be upon him, he himself used to keep his pants above the ankle to show that I'm doing the exact opposite of what these people are doing. So there's more humility in keeping the pant above the ankle, right? So this is the reason behind it. It had to do with preventing arrogance from taking place, and this was a habit that was there. So what scholars have said basically now is, if somebody is dragging their pants, or they have their pants below the ankles and they're doing it out of pride, like some people, they sag their pants. You guys know what sagging pants is, right? They kind of let it drag down a little bit. A lot of people, they do that out of pride, to kind of show off when they're putting their pants down. So if you're doing it for that reason, then there's an aspect of pride. that is prohibited in Islam, right? So this is not something that should be done. When it comes to if you're not doing it out of pride, if it's just part of your culture, this is the way you go to a store and you buy pants, and the pants that fit on your waist, they automatically come with the pant, the part below the ankle. Do you have to cut them off or do you not cut them off? That's the question. So there are some scholars, some Muslim scholars who say, yes, you have to cut the pant so that it's above the ankle because of this hadith, right? And then there are other scholars who said, no, this was a cultural thing that used to happen in Arabia. Now it's the culture in America, or the culture in most places, where your pant is designed that way. You're not purposely making it longer. That's the way it's designed to fit your body. So it doesn't make sense to go buy something and then cut it because you didn't buy the extra material in order to show off. That's just the way that it comes, and that's the way everyone wears it, right? So this is kind of the reason why some people who take the first opinion of the scholars and they take the hadith a little bit more literally, they say we have to make sure that we cut it so that the pants are actually above the ankles, so we're following exactly what the hadith says literally. The other scholar says, no, we don't have to take it literally because it had to do in the context of pride, and the culture at the time has changed now in our own time. If that culture comes back, then we should start cutting it. If it becomes a culture of pride and arrogance to do this. If it's not in part of our culture, then we don't need to do this. Yes. So, good question. I mean, it's a good way of thinking. Does it have anything to do with filth or something like that? The answer is no, not specifically this hadith. Because for women, this doesn't apply for women. So they're also dragging. In fact, they were dragging, and it was not about women at all. It was only about men, because the custom was about men dragging, right? So otherwise, the issue would have been that women are getting najasa as well on their thing. But that's not the issue, actually. Yeah. And in some cultures, we have this, like in wedding dresses. Long dragging, right? Like it just drags from, So the thing is, like, this was a style that was used in certain, cases. Yeah, that's the reason. At least they have people carrying it in the back, right? In the wedding dress. There's no najasa coming out. Alhamdulillah, yes. Okay. So that's another contentious topic. So the question is about instruments and music, and what does Islam say about musical instruments, right? So first of all, let's talk about the topic of music in and of itself. So the idea of singing and the idea of music is something that we need to look at in Islam. A lot of music that exists today with the foul language and with the bad meanings and bad influences, it's very, very problematic. And we should definitely try and avoid all of this stuff because it has an effect on us. But since your question is specific to instruments in Islam, in terms of accompanying music, singing in Islam is not a problem at all. Now, when it comes to instruments, there are some hadiths which talk about instruments being a bad thing in Islam. Okay? All of those hadiths that prohibit instruments, all of them are weak except one of them. Okay, all of them are generally very weak. They're not very strong as considered evidence except one. And that one hadith, what it does is it talks about a situation that there's going to come a time where people are drinking and they have, they're in a gathering where there's a lot of haram things going on, and they're going to be listening to musical instruments as well. So scholars, when they looked at this hadith, there's two different ways in which they took it. Many of them, they took it and they said, this means that musical instruments are prohibited in Islam. The second way in which they took it is, they said, no, it's not the instrument. This hadith is describing a person in this circumstance doing all these haram things, and they happen to incidentally be listening to music at the same time. It's not the music that's being prohibited in the hadith itself. So there's two ways of actually interpreting this hadith and some of the other hadiths. So what's happened is basically there's two groups of scholars. One group of scholars said instruments generally are prohibited in Islam except on special occasions only, like weddings and stuff like that. And those instruments should be restricted to like percussion instruments like drum or duff or something like that. So this is one opinion. The second opinion is that no, there's not much strong evidence for that. Instruments are not prohibited because the evidence, the hadiths and all that, they're weak. So what's prohibited is if the song has a bad meaning, or the song is taking place in a bad place, like a nightclub or a rave party or something like that. It's designed to keep you away from those type of places because it has a culture associated with all the music industry. So it's the industry and the type of people who engage in musical instruments that we should be on guard from. So these are two opinions. Allah knows best. But if you're listening to something that doesn't have a very bad meaning, it doesn't have a very bad influence or impact, then there are scholars like Shaykh Yusuf al-Qaradawi and others who say that instruments are not prohibited in and of themselves. But then there are other scholars who say that they are. So it's a difference of opinion there. There should be room for that. So don't push the opinion on somebody else. Whichever opinion you follow, you don't have to push it on somebody else because there's leeway for this. Inshallah. Okay. Other questions?
Talking about music, it's not really wrong, right? To use instruments.
I'm saying that there's a group of scholars who said that, yeah.
So then maybe, so I'm thinking now that it's okay, like if it makes you feel good or something. Right?
As long as it doesn't have negative influences on you, yeah. So scholars like Shaykh Yusuf Qaradawi, they put a bunch of conditions under which music is halal. And he has pretty strict conditions. One of the conditions is that there's no bad meaning in the song. The second condition is the most difficult, and that is the people who are singing the song are not fusaq, which means that they are not bad role models and they're people of evil and sin, which really makes it difficult. He's put a pretty strict condition there. So that's another condition that that you need to just take into consideration. Not everyone put that condition, but that's a condition that's there. Okay. Yes. Okay. So you're just taking them to the room in order to get the organs out? And what is the purpose for it? What are they going to do with the organs? Right, okay. So the question is, what if you work as a nurse or someone who's taking patients in to get organs removed from a person in order for transplants to take place? Right, who are declared brain dead or something like that. Right. So they've already died basically. Pretty much. Right. So they'll die before you're taking out the organs, right? Yeah. So they'll be dead. They'll be declared legally dead. Yeah. So the question is, can you transport these people to that facility or that room? Absolutely. Can you even be the doctor who's removing those organs? Yes, absolutely. Because it's there for a benefit. The whole issue of organ donation is a separate thing, but whether you can work in that field and whether that field is intrinsically problematic, no, it's not, because there's a benefit for organ donation. Right? So there's something that, these you're harvesting the organs and these organs are going to be used potentially for somebody else. This is permissible. This is not considered desecration of the body or something like that. Inshallah. Yes. Yeah, so you heard that they're okay? Yeah, okay, so you heard wrong. So the question is, so he heard that pork meat is haram, but the other parts are okay. But that's not true. All the other parts are also forbidden. So the reason why the Quran says lahmul khinzir in the Quran is because That's a way. That's a way the Arabic language works. Is that the um, you express prohibition on the thing which is most likely going to be consumed. The best part of an animal is the meat of the animal for human beings, right? So they use that because that's what's generally going to be eaten, right? But it doesn't mean that it excludes the fat and the blood and everything else is somehow, allowed or something like that. So all parts of a pig are actually prohibited in Islam, and that's clear cut. There's no difference of opinion on that. So like gelatin, the same thing applies. So gelatin is made by the bones and other parts of the pig, boiling it and then making this powder which turns into gelatin. This is also considered to be prohibited because coming from a pig. Pig fat is also considered to be prohibited. Eating pig's skin or whatever other parts people eat of a pig or organs or something like that, all of them are equally prohibited. So the animal itself is prohibited as being haram, not just the meat itself.
What about, you already set out the criteria for, let's say, for music, and that's like good role models and that's what's not good involved in. What about like such music such as electronic dubstep versus nasheeds? Because nasheed for sure has good role models, but what about its use of instrument and the purpose of it? I mean, wouldn't nasheed be just looked at as any other music that actually is religious music?
Nasheed depends on how you define nasheed, So it's generally going to come under the category of religious music because there's a religious element in the lyrics. Like that's my understanding of nasheed is that it's generally something Islamic or something religious, as compared to any other random song about I walked down the street and whatever saw a car or I don't know whatever song is there, right? So in my understanding, that's what a nasheed is. Do you have a different understanding of what nasheed is? Mm.
He started using the piano. At the time, before he told me correct me if I was wrong, any instrument is okay.
So like I said, there's two opinions on this. The second opinion I was mentioning is yes, all of them are fine. And that's the opinion that he's taking. He's following the opinion of Sheikh Yusuf Qaradawi.
So in this case, would it be safe Islamically to listen to the nasheed?
Yeah, I mean, everyone has to make that decision. I think it's generally safe to listen to nasheeds that don't have a bad influence on you. They generally have a good meaning. If there's some, background piano noise or something like that, I think it should be okay, inshallah.
Like you mentioned that gelatin made from pork ingredients
Yeah.
is halal, but I remember I don't know how you said it or in what context, but you mentioned something about some ingredient that comes from alcohol. Its form is modified, so it's okay. Like in some food, they use something derived from alcohol, right, or something.
Yeah, so I don't remember what I had said in what context, but so there's two principles. So the first the first principle is if you have an alcohol that was not produced with the purpose of intoxicating anyone. Like, let me give you an example. Ice cream. Who eats ice cream here? Who likes ice cream? Come on, raise your hand. So a little bit, but they undergo from a powder, and there'll be a gathering where they're getting not something that's 100% haram or something like that. The question is, should we celebrate birthdays, right? As Muslims. So the thing is, when you look at the origins of why people started celebrating birthdays, what is the connotation, what is the psychological effect, you can make an argument that it's not the best thing to do, right? Everyone's doing it, but is it the best thing to do? Some people have said that the origins of putting the candles and lighting it and all of that, they have some potential pagan historical roots or something like that. Let's assume that it doesn't, right? The idea of just being happy about achieving another year of life or something like that, it's not necessarily something you need to, it's not the best thing to be celebrating, right? So celebrating is not prohibited. You can make an argument whether it's better Muslims do it or better Muslims avoid it, but it's not in the prohibited area. Now, when it comes to celebrating the birthday of a prophet, of any prophet, right? First of all, the reality is we don't know the birthday exactly of any of the prophets. We don't know when Prophet Moses was born. We don't know when Prophet Noah was born. And the real birthday of Prophet Isa, Prophet Jesus, we don't know either. So December 25th is definitely not the date. It's a date that originates somewhere else. In fact, in Russia and other places, they have Christmas on January 6th. In other places, they have Christmas on January 9th. Right? So there's different dates that people celebrate Christmas because this was an arbitrary day that was fixed and set. So it's not even the correct date anyways. So the issue of Christmas, though, has nothing to do with whether you're allowed to celebrate the birthday of a prophet or not. That's a totally side issue. The issue with Christmas is what it entails, right? Because it's coming from a different religious, tradition. Because the people who are celebrating it have clearly the belief that the Savior and Lord is being born on this day. So, following that same way is kind of like giving a, what's the right word? Like giving an approval almost, like a thumbs up to someone who's committing shirk, basically, right? Associating partners with Allah. So that's why we're not supposed to imitate any religious things of other religious people. Any type of religious festival that's taking place or has religious connotations, we're supposed to distance ourselves as Muslims from that as much as possible. Anything that is other non-Muslims are doing, but there's no religious connotation. Just a harvest festival, the cherry blossoms are coming at this date and we have a party or whatever, perfectly fine. No problem in having that, right? So that's generally that. Since you said you're a revert yourself, right? So when it comes to people who have non-Muslim family members who are celebrating Christmas, that's when it becomes a little bit more difficult, because sometimes that's the only time your family is going to get together maybe in the whole year. And now you've become Muslim and your family is like, you know what? Come home, we're going to meet all the family members, family get together and gathering, and you're like, you know what, I'm not going to be there. Like, it's the only day in the whole year and you're boycotting the entire family. So when it comes to people who have non-Muslim family members who are celebrating Christmas, what generally needs to happen is you need to distance yourself from the religious aspects of what's being celebrated, but you can participate in all the secular aspects that are being celebrated. So if there's dinner, right? So we're having a Christmas dinner. So okay, I'm in your heart. You say I'm having a holiday dinner with you, right? If they're gonna go and start opening presents or something, say okay, I'm not gonna help. I'm not gonna do the whole present thing under the tree, but I brought you a housewarming gift or whatever, right? I bought you a present because I haven't seen you in a year, right? So things like that, we can make small adjustments where you're not participating in the religious aspect of the holiday, but you don't need to keep on every year calling it out so that you have a problem with your family or somebody who's very close to you, right? So it's very important to kind of draw that distinction between boycotting and maintaining family relations without stepping the line of participating in Christmas celebrations. Inshallah. Yes. Okay.
What if you're like kind of, you used to be the host, you used to be the
Yeah.
that was doing it.
Yes.
The one that was like, oh, there's going to be a big change. And you're the one that always prepared it.
Mm-hmm.
And now that I'm a revert,
Yeah.
we're going to do my first Christmas
Mm.
and everything changes. So what do I do now?
Yeah, if you were the party planner in the past, basically, what you can do is substitute it with another party and a better party. So especially, let's say, for example, you have people coming over, they used to come over one day, let's say they used to fly in from out of town or something like that, have it 1 or 2 days before or 1 or 2 days after, and still throw a party, but now it's a holiday party, it's a winter party, and it's better than any other party you've ever thrown before, right? So do the party part, but just make sure it's not tied to this, and try to avoid it on the day as well if you can. So just do it the day after. And say, you know what, this is more convenient, and there's way more, I could get better setup and gifts and whatever there is, right? So just modify it a little bit so now it's a party, so you can still have the party, you just don't have the Christmas aspect of it, right? You have the holiday aspect of it, inshallah ta'ala. Yes. Yeah. So he didn't say he was celebrating his birthday, but he said it's his birthday. Yeah. So that's true. There's a hadith about the Prophet, peace be upon him, when he's fasting, he used to fast on Mondays and Thursdays. And when they said he fasted on Mondays, they said, why do you pick Monday? He said, it's my birthday. It's the day in which I was born. So the question is, does that mean that he's celebrating his birthday necessarily? It's probably one of the, he wants to fast 2 days a week. Which days is he going to pick? So he has to pick days for a certain reason. So one of the narrations says that it's the day where deeds are raised up. So that's one of the reasons why on the Thursday. The other day, he picked Monday, for maybe arbitrary or for whatever other reason. That's just one of the reasons he mentioned. So that's the explanation that we know about that hadith, about fasting on Monday. But it doesn't mean that he would celebrate his birthday in a different way that people do. And what's interesting is people generally celebrate his birthday. When they celebrate his birthday, they do it by having a big feast. And he celebrated by fasting. It's complete opposite. Right? Yes. Euthanasia. Yeah.
What extent as a Muslim do you participate as required
By your employer? Oh, if you're working in the hospital industry, yeah. What is the law exactly? What exactly does it say? Right. And you're obligated to do it by law? No religious exemption? Does anyone know about that law? New euthanasia law in California that was passed, that you cannot opt out of assisted. Yeah, I'm not sure about that, but I believe that there would be a religious exemption. And we should utilize the religious exemption. All right, so there's a few issues when it comes to medical ethics. When you're doing something which is clearly prohibited in Islam, not only for Muslims, but generally prohibited for you to be doing to anyone else, we should try to opt out of those as much as possible, right? And usually you should have a religious exemption. So some examples would be, unless the law has really, really changed drastically, one example would be euthanasia. So if you're asked to, basically kill this person, and they're not dead yet, then you should opt out of that and say, as a Muslim, I'm not allowed to participate in this. Another example would be sex changes, for example. So a lot of people who are transgender, they want to have a sex change, surgery. And there's some Muslim doctors who perform those things. Now they're performing those things on people who have characteristics of male and female, then it's allowed for them to perform that surgery. But when they have no characteristic whatsoever and someone just decides, no, I want to be a female now, or I want to be a male now, that's the problem. So they should opt out of that as well. So we know one of the brothers in Orange County here, he has this problem. So there's a new law that might be passing, I don't know if it's passed yet, that's going to prevent him from opting out. And he cannot refuse performing these surgeries for people who are transgender. And that's going to be a big problem for him, and I don't know what he's going to do. But until now, he told me recently that he can opt out. He has a religious exemption until now. So there are usually religious exemptions on a lot of these things, and we should take those religious exemptions as long as we have them. Inshallah. Yeah. So that's a little bit different because you don't know what the person's state is. You don't know how much they're going to recover or not. So it's kind of like a question mark on cutting life support and those type of things. But this one is totally different. You're actually administering something that's going to kill the person straight up. So that's more of a clear area, right? Whereas here is a little bit more flexibility for that. The organ donation? So that's... Right, so donating your organs, after you die, it's a matter of debate among scholars. Again, right? Whether you should or you shouldn't, right? So I personally have not made up my mind on this issue. So I don't have a clear stance on this issue. But there are two opinions, whether it's recommended to do so or this is considered an unnecessary like defilement of the body, which shouldn't be unnecessarily done. If your body is already messed up or something, then yes, you can extract organs from it. But whether you should volunteer for that or volunteer to have your body used in medical research and people will just go and cut you up or put you in a medical school and have some first year medical students dissect you or something, that's a matter of debate among scholars. So I don't have an answer on that, unfortunately.
Thinking about that, like sometimes it's happened before, in my experience, like baby dies, still born baby. The doctors want to take a piece of the baby, take something.
No, that's different. So if you're looking at autopsy, you're looking at a way to figure out what the cause of death is, and it's something that is very important. Like let's say there's a murder case or something like that, then yes, in that case there's room for that. If there's no need for it and it's not beneficial, they just say, oh, it would be nice to find out or whatever. It's not very, very important, then it should generally not be done. Yeah. So, next question. Okay. You give the loan yourself or you're a loan agent, loan officer, right? Right. Right. So that's a difficult situation and it's understandable. Someone who's been a loan officer for a very long time, they've developed a reputation and a status that they have their clients. What do? I mean, the thing is, you try your best to gradually transition out of it, if you can. And usually, if there's a will, there's a way, as they say, right? So the best thing would be to start slowly trying to prepare for something different. And make that transition, and you take the time that you need in order to make the transition, right? So that's generally what should be done. I know it's difficult. It can be very, very difficult. Someone's been in that field for a very long time, but then the more you understand what riba does in the community, in the society, why Allah prohibited it, and you understand the wisdom behind it, the more convinced you will be that this is better for me, and it's better for my family, and I'm going to be doing something good. So inshallah ta'ala, may Allah give you the strength for that. Yeah. No, you should no. So you should look into the why and the wisdom. Yeah, it's gonna help you. It's gonna help you a lot. Yeah, email me. I can send you some articles as well. If you're a reader, I can send you a lot of articles about it. And it's really, you'll realize, you'll be really convinced that, this is the right thing to do, inshallah ta'ala. So you can just email me, inshallah. Get my email from any of the sisters, inshallah. So I think, honestly, I'm sure the majority of the Muslims, before they took out their mortgage, they probably asked this question to somebody else already, right? So they already had an answer, right? So the thing is, if they've already asked someone, they can, unless they have a doubt in the answer that they were given, there's really no need to, answer the question again, because otherwise you could just go and ask someone, you can go and ask another person, go and ask another. If you ask my personal opinion, right, I don't think it's something that should be done. I said I don't think it's something that should be done, right? Even though it's a good financial move, it's a good, economical move, it's not something that's at the level of being necessary, right? Oh no, so an Islamic loan is something different. So if it's really an Islamic loan where there's no interest involved, then of course, then there's nothing wrong with it at all. Right? So, but the thing is, mortgage, right, until you pay it off, which makes sense. That's why it's Islamic, right? So the thing is, you can't actually own something that you haven't paid for, generally. So that's the Islamic model. So I mean, it's not comfortable. It's like, you know what? No. So the thing is, you would own a percentage of it, right? So if there's a way to structure it so that you have some kind of safeguard where you have a percentage. If the company tries to flip it or you go out of business or whatever, let's say you had paid off 40%, you still own your 40%. So you get to keep your share in the property of whatever you had until that point. Yeah, or depending on what contract. There's so many different models, But depending on what type of contract it is and all that, usually there's a safeguard there. There needs to be a safeguard there. Yeah, you shouldn't get involved in any model that doesn't have proper safeguards. That's a problem in and of itself. Inshallah. So inshallah, with that, it's past 9 o'clock. Inshallah ta'ala. So hopefully this was we learned something from this, and we hope inshallah ta'ala that we'll have another session. There's probably a few more questions. Seems like there's quite a few questions coming from the audience, inshallah. Do you want to have another session like this in the future? Should we have another one? Okay, inshallah. So we'll keep doing them, inshallah. Alright, inshallah. May Allah